Elden Ring is an incredible game. As somebody who's beaten it a myriad of times and who has engaged in the EVP with a myriad of builds and, of course, levels, as well as engaged in the co op element of the game, it's an amazing game. I love it. There's no reason to say that it is like less than great because it is. That being said, this game and the games that followed it, like Dark Souls or Bloodborne, has had an issue for quite some time, and that's quite frankly the multiplayer. And Elden Ring really showcased this issue due to, I think, its very incredible popularity of how many people truly do not care for or, in fact, loathe this form of multiplayer to the point where a mod coming out is so popular that the amount of downloads it has overtakes its concurrent Steam player base count, which is a little incredible to say the least, on how many people truly and effectively do not care for this multiplayer. And I think there is a very distinct reason why, and instead of being particularly upset that people feel this way, I feel like we need to go to a deep dive and not only talk about the PvP, which is something that plenty of people like to complain about, but just quite frankly talk about the multiplayer system in general and how truly it is one of the most not great things in these games. And so come with me, and we will talk about how, quite frankly, these things need a change, overhaul, and I want to explain exactly why and what maybe they should do to really fix these problems. The origin of that idea is actually due to a personal experience where a car suddenly stopped on a hillside after some heavy snow and started to slip. The car following me also got stuck, and then the one behind it spontaneously bumped into it and started pushing it up the hill. That's it. That's how everyone can get home. Then it was my turn, and everyone started pushing my car up the hill, and I managed to get home safely. But I couldn't stop the car and say thanks to the people who gave me a shove. I'd have just got stuck again if I'd stopped. On the way back home, I wondered whether the last person in line had made it home and thought that I would probably never meet the people who had helped me. I thought that maybe if we'd met in another place, we'd become friends, or maybe we'd fight. You'd probably call it a connection of mutual assistance between transient people. Oddly, that incident will probably linger in my heart for a long time, simply because it's fleeting. I think it stays with you a lot longer, like the cherry blossoms we Japanese love so much. This is a quote from the creative director Miyazaki, who was answering a question in regards to his inspiration for the multiplayer system, because it's quite frankly a very unique one. And you can quite clearly see how his experience that he referenced can truly translate to the multiplayer system, but only if you look at it very narrowly, and which in that narrow scope, it works out well, and something that should be in these games, quite frankly, which is the ability to summon random people to help you out. That is good. That creates positive experiences in a more positive community. When people want to go out their way to help others, that is good, you know? That is something that should be in any game, quite frankly. But Miyazaki's vision with this particular system really sort of ends being good there. Because it doesn't really work out when you go away from the narrow scope that this PvP system is supposed to do and does, quite frankly, well. And that is when you engage with the co-op element of it. The playing with your friend, your family member, or whomever it may be, and engage with it that way. Because, sure, it makes sense for a random person to despawn so that you can summon another random person that will despawn when you finish a boss. But it makes very little sense for that to happen with your friends. Because it isn't a random encounter, it's you people trying to enjoy the game with each other. And not really having that random sort of encounter and such. And this system has been within these games all the way up to Elden Ring. An open world game with over 80 bosses. You can see, probably, how this system would become even more, quite frankly, unnecessary and tedious. Because for a co-op playthrough of Elden Ring, you have to practically defeat the bosses twice. And I mean, that's the factor in any of these games. But it's even worse if you plan on 100%ing Elden Ring. And even if you only go after the main bosses, per se, it even becomes... even that is just tedious, and such. Defeating the bosses twice. I mean, I love the bosses of Elden Ring, but I don't know if I really care to defeat them twice in roughly the same way. And the thing that I've noticed that really sort of dampens the experience is that the first person in these playthroughs generally gets all the good shit. Because generally, you don't want to go through the same pathway, the same exploratory stuff that you do with the second person, because that is just unnecessary, unless you, of course, have your own plans on what you want to do. Because that's what I've noticed. You know, if there's like an unnecessary item to get, you know, the first person gets it, but the second person will probably ignore it. This, of course, means that there's just things that one person isn't getting comparatively to the other. Because you never know when you want to switch builds, you know, the sort of creativity of Dark Souls, Elden Ring and such. And that problem just mixed in with the tediousness of it boggles the mind as to how this is still a system. And this is ignoring the fact of, even to engage in the multiplayer system, you need in these games to have an item. In Elden Ring, sure, to make the argument, it is easy as Sunday morning to make the item required for PvP. Other games, it wasn't exactly as easy. You know, if you died to a myriad of things that could happen within these games, and you don't have your humanities in Dark Souls 1, or embers in Dark Souls 3, or whatever, you aren't able to play with people, play with your friends. That's really silly. And the thing is that they've made it easier and easier to play with the people that you want to co-op with, and yet still kept the tediousness to it. I mean, back in the day, in the Dark Souls days, you could summon each other, but it was very... the other people could summon you. It was very scuffed. And Dark Souls 2 added soul stuff, which allowed it to be easier if you guys were leveling at the same time to summon each other. And then they finally added passwords in the later games. They made it easier, but they still kept the tediousness, which is, to me, not exactly super great. And it creates just... I'll say not the worst horrible experience imaginable, because it's still a fun experience. You're playing with friends, and it's fun. But it creates unnecessary tediousness. Something I will continually repeat in this video. And it doesn't exactly go back to what Miyazaki was saying for his inspiration, because you aren't being helped by a random individual. Generally, when you are helped by a friend, they will continually helping you. And so the sort of comparison doesn't really work with the system. I think you should be able to summon or, in fact, invite people that you know very seamlessly, and have the same system that is in these games to summon random people. I think that's fine. I think that's a system that's worth keeping. But the system that basically creates this tediousness, to me, needs to go. When you look at the co-op mod for Elden Ring, you can see that being the better experience. Being able to get the same items, being able to kill the same bosses seamlessly without caring of saying waving goodbye and then re-summoning each other is such a better experience, because it doesn't create that tediousness that to me just delays fun. And how is that good? I want somebody to tell me, how is this a good system? Because it quite frankly isn't. And this co-op mod completely erases that problem entirely, and needs to be something that the people who create these games, like Miyazaki, should be aware of at this point. And I think there is more awareness because of the popularity of Elden Ring, so maybe we might see a future change, but it's something that's intrinsically in the system and probably won't be a thing unless another one of these games comes out in the next X 5 or so years. And I hope that they really take critique like this to heart. Because just with the basic multiplayer system, there is, in fact, that many issues with it that they need to really rethink. And to me, I just think it needs to be seamless. They need to take what that co-op mod does and just apply it to the game. Because to me, that is the better experience. But of course, there's another thing that co-op mod does that needs to be talked about that is also multiplayer related, that is part of this discussion as well. PvP. It's arguably one of the more polarizing elements of the Elden Ring, Dark Souls games and such, as it is a very unique sort of concept for the game that you don't really see in others, as you typically see PvE and PvP elements in other games, like Halo, for example, to separate the two, to make it so that you know that you aren't going to be dealing with players while you are dealing with the Covenant in a Halo game. And while certainly Elden Ring and such aren't exactly unique with having PvE and PvP elements, it is very unique in how it can be quite abrupt when you are engaging in PvE elements within Elden Ring and or the Dark Souls games. That is because in games that typically do have PvE elements, you are very fully aware of what's happening. When you opt in for PvP, say with the War Mode feature in a game like World of Warcraft, you're opting in knowing full well that you're engaging in PvP. And Elden Ring has a system that's very similar to that, and that is, of course, using a liar's tongue, which will automatically put you as a number one target for PvP. But this is not so really the case, as you also get invaded when you are co-oping. Which leads me to what I said in the previous section, which just creates more tediousness to co-oping, and makes co-oping sort of one of those things that really feels even worse. Because co-oping is already a tedious thing within these games. I've tried to make that argument before, but then with Elden Ring, now basically having this be one of the only ways to get invaded, it creates more tediousness. Now don't get me wrong, the other games, if you opted for co-op, you were going to get invaded too. Because in order to do that, you had to be embered or had to have a humanity in you in order to summon a person. And so co-oping generally had those same problems in other games. But it has the same issues where you engage in the same tediousness that a player showing up out of the blue to come at you. And quite frankly, a lot of the times, people who invade you are doing so with PvP in mind. They're not doing so knowing that you are this PvE individual who's just trying to explore the world with their buddy O. Oh, they're doing it with the intention to win, which is the intention most people have. This is the intention in most games. You know, oh, I mean, and the thing is that I made my previous video was about crutch perks in Dead by Daylight, but I think I can say the same thing about somebody in Elden Ring using Rivers of Blood or Bloodhound Step. They are using the most broken, powerful shit to destroy the competition. It's just in Elden Ring, it's probably a lot worse, because there is no real combating this sort of ordeal. And you will see more often than not these types of people engaging in this type of behavior because of just that's the way the PvP is incentivized. There's no lobby that you go into a PvP. You actively have to find an item to engage with it, meaning that people have to really sort of go out their way to constantly engage with it, meaning that it better be worth their while, and so they should have the better stuff. Especially when engaging, even when invading, there's the chance of dealing with people who have higher level stuff just because of how the co-op system can work when you can co-op with people who have played the game over and over again and only are downgraded to your level but are still allowed destructively OP weapons and abilities. Is it allows people to be find it more necessary to, of course, build the most OP shit, which then in turn means that the people who don't nearly have as much OP stuff and can possibly defend themselves don't really have much of a chance, and creates just very unfortunate experience. I wouldn't say it ruins the experience per se, but it creates and adds to the problem that I have already stated in a previous part of this video. Just adds to the tediousness that is very unnecessary for any game to have. Tediousness in games are one of the worst things you could have, and if it's especially not fun. And stuff like this could in fact ruin a session. I wouldn't say it ruins the game. I think anybody who claims that Elden Ring or Dark Souls or whatever are bad games specifically for this reasons, I think are not being quite adequate, because you can do plenty of other things to make these games good. That doesn't necessarily have to involve this, but it creates a bad experience where I can quite frankly understand why somebody might just lower a ranking for Elden Ring because of this bad experience and the tediousness that it creates. And what sucks is that what system would you replace this with? Because that is what kind of makes the Dark Souls PvP experience one of the more unique ones. Being able to engage with the environment, being the invader, having the opposition against you that is a full frontal force that you have to use all your resources at your disposal to deal with. That is a thrilling experience to a degree, but it becomes less thrilling when people, of course, do what people do and they optimize the shit out of the experience. I mean, it creates such a bad gameplay loop that it makes people maybe not even want to engage in the co-op experience anymore. That I think would ruin people's experience. Like, that could definitely happen. And again, we can see this co-op mod when we look at examples as to how we can actually look at data to see how people really feel about the PvP. And this co-op mod clearly shows that people don't care to engage with it. People don't care about the tediousness that both the PvP and the basic multiplayer system that Elden Ring provides is lackluster, and people would rather have the co-op mod than to deal with any of that. And one of the most crucial things that I think really defines how people don't want to deal with this and how this is a system that I think just doesn't work out for most people is how the liar's tongue is used. The liar's tongue is your basic I want to PvP item to use, where you are going to be invaded if you use it. How many times have you really seen a solo person use this? How many times? Practically none. You don't see this happen all too much, and the only times you do see it happen is if you see somebody with some busted ass shit on top of a hill just so he can mess up whatever scuffed build you brought. It doesn't happen with somebody who just wants to enjoy the invasion experience, because it just doesn't. You see this item used with ganks and with what I just explained. And it creates just a very unfortunate experience, quite frankly, for both. It's why I can see why people want to invade at particular levels, because it's a much more enjoyable experience to fight against scrubs than it is to fight against people who have busted ass shit or are in groups of 4 or 3, groups of 3. Hey, and you can see how this just creates an unfortunate experience for almost everybody involved, and the only people who actively enjoy it are the ones who enjoy defeating people who barely have a chance, which to me is very weak. It's like on a PvP server in WoW, somebody getting a thrill and joy ganking the level 20 on a PvP server. Well, certainly that is much more of a choice. It is very strange to me to get a thrill basically actually ruining somebody's time when that is clearly the intention. And I think that this system needs to change. It needs to not be how it is. It needs to be in a way more opt-in system so that people don't feel forced to need to use a mod in order to engage with this system. What I think needs to ultimately happen is they need to do a lot of stuff to make the PvP more interesting, but to not force people into the PvP. Because they have gone through strides to make it more fair, but they have not done nearly enough. And it quite frankly shows. And if they want to make it work, they need to do things. So to wrap up this video, I would like to just simply offer solutions. And the first solution is a quite simple one in practice, but obviously harder to implement, and that is to just make the co-op experience seamless. Being able to go from one boss to another without caring to summon, gather particular resources. I think, I didn't really mention the resource element, but that is also something that could probably be less of, but maybe Elden Ring has a better solution for that. But it should be seamless. You shouldn't really have to go again and again and basically replay the game twice, basically. I think that's a clear solution that I think that barely anybody should be able to really object to. The only thing I think that should keep is, of course, being able to summon random people, and the system should very much stay the same there, because it abides by what Miyazaki originally intended with the system, and I think it works perfectly well. PvP system, however, that's a little different of a frog to solve, and my solution, which would require a bit more work and probably another game really to implement, would be to create 2 different types of gameplays, or servers, or however you want to call it, where one would be PvE and one would be PvP. In the PvE server, you can practically just opt into the PvP element by either dueling or using a liar's tongue and then invading somebody with said liar's tongue, but you can't no longer invade on those particular servers, modes, or whatever if they're co-oping or whatever, just because it's clear that it's just a tedious element of the game. Whereas now there'll be a PvP server, or you'll be invaded even at level 1, and maybe that you might get a special little finger or some sort that you can immediately invade with it when you start the game. Like there is a lot of things they could do, and I mean stuff that they could possibly implement into the game to make the PvP servers even more interesting would be maybe to have summons be used, because I think that would get chaotic. There's a lot of solutions there that I think would make everybody happy. Considering that one of the things I hear PvP players say all the time is how they are the bedrock of the game, so I mean that they are the ones that will keep the game active. I think it would make sense if there would be just a server where they could have their fun and let the people who initially play the game and probably might fall off later to have their fun too. I think that's a decent solution to this particular problem. And, depending on how it's implemented, balancing, and all that stuff, I think that is a proper solution to this. But this is, of course, assuming if there's the time and there is the necessary framework in the game itself that something like this could happen. So, with that being said, this is the end of the video, my friends. I hope you've enjoyed the long ride, and I will hope to see you next time for my next video. I will see you all later. Goodbye.